Hi, my name is Vicki Ellis, and I am the Executive Director of Heritage Ranch Christian Children's Home. I just want to thank you so much for joining today. I'm going to be speaking about parenting styles. Currently, I am doing a video series on the different parenting styles and how they affect you working with your children. So, overall, there are 4 primary parenting styles that people use. Those are punitive, permissive, mixed, and democratic. Now, you may have heard them called many other things, but for the purpose of today, that's how I'll be referring to them. So, our parenting styles typically are pretty consistent in our interactions with our kids. Sometimes they may shift a bit depending on if we're feeling intensely stressed or we're feeling in a really chill mood, and so we tend towards a different style of parenting, but overall, we have one style that we use most of the time. It is really critical that as parents, we are evaluating the effectiveness of our default parenting style, and when needed, that we're ready and responsive to learning a new style that can be more effective. Our styles are typically formed by how we were raised and often impacted a lot by how our spouse, if we're married, co-parented, and even also can be affected by what we see our friends using or how we see others parenting. So do know that for the purpose of today's video, I am going to be talking about the democratic approach and how it is used in one's parenting. And my goal will be that if you identify this as your primary parenting style, then I want to encourage you by highlighting its benefits and encouraging you to continue using it. If you typically use a permissive or a punitive approach and you're watching this video, I would encourage you to really pay close attention because the democratic approach is going to be the most effective approach you can use with your kids. So, when you hear people talk about the democratic approach, what you're going to see is that it is both firm and respectful. So it involves effective limit setting that requires a balance between firmness and respect. The democratic approach works really well with all children of different temperaments. Whether your child's compliant or they're strong-willed, this approach can be effective. The great thing about using the democratic approach is it gets the job done in less time, with less injury, and often doesn't hurt feelings, damage relationships, and most important, if you have kids, is it does not provoke power struggles in your parenting. So democratic does not mean decision-making by consensus or problem solving by compromise, or that you are abdicating your parental role. What it does is it's used to illustrate how you are establishing boundaries and expectations in your home and what can be expected by your kids. So the great thing about the democratic approach is that it creates opportunities for healthy testing and for your kids to really explore within defined guidelines and boundaries how their choices impact what happens in their life. And so children hear parents' words when they use this approach, and they experience the action that supports those words. And that typically, if you're using the democratic approach, happens without the anger, the strong emotions, and the power struggles that really do interfere with good communication. So when you're using the democratic approach, the message is clear and the rule behind it is clear. So it creates a lot of stability for your kids. The underlying belief with this approach is that children learn best when they are encouraged and allowed to experience the consequences of their choices and their behaviors. Children are encouraged to make choices and to experience the outcome of those choices and learn from those experiences. Whether those choices are positive or negative, the goal is that you want them to learn from them. And so in this approach, the teaching and the learning process is very cooperative with your kids. The role of a parent when they're using this approach is to guide the natural learning process. You want to give really clear messages with your words, let your kids know what to expect, and then follow through with consequences that are logical and related to your kids' behavior. So if you're using the democratic approach, when your child does something, you're going to give a very clear expectation and you're going to follow through with a very logical consequence. So the great news when you're using this approach is that typically it takes a lot less energy than the punitive or the permissive approach does. If you haven't watched my videos on punitive style of parenting or the permissive style of parenting, I hope you'll take a few minutes to do so. I'll tell you overall that when you use the punitive approach, it means that you are typically very strict and very emotional when you're responding to your kids. If you're using the permissive approach, you're typically bartering a lot and you're trying to convince your kids what to do. The great thing about the democratic approach is that you have preset expectations for your kids. You tell them what those are, and then you allow them to make a choice, and they have to deal with and learn to process through the outcomes of those choices. So, for example, if your child was playing a gaming device and you tell them, hey, it's time for dinner, it's time to get off your gaming device, and they don't do it, a permissive parent is going to try to remind them a lot of times. A punitive parent might say, if you don't get off of that right now, you're grounded for 3 days. If you were using the democratic approach, what you would say is something like, if you choose not to get off of your gaming device, I want to let you know that you're going to be losing use of it tomorrow. Just like that. I'm not yelling. I'm not bartering. I'm simply letting the child know that they have a decision to make, and if they make the decision to stay on, that the outcome is going to be that they're going to lose it. The powerful thing about this is that you're teaching the child cause and effect. If I choose to disregard what my parent's saying, then I am going to lose this tomorrow. You're also teaching them to think long term. Our goal when we're evaluating our parenting style should not be to get immediate compliance. It needs to be to teach your kids how to make decisions, how to problem solve, and how to think about the fact that whatever they do, an emotional moment or a moment when they don't want to follow through on something you've asked, that it's going to have an impact long term. I like to remind people all the time that the goal of parenting is healthy adults, not just happy, satisfied kids. And so what you need to think about is that this too shall pass in terms of their emotion. But if you are consistent with using the democratic approach, your kids are going to trust that what you say is what you mean. They will expect the consistency, and over time what you're going to find is that they're going to know that if you say this is the choice and this is what's going to happen, that's what they can expect. And so it just creates so much communication and productivity. And the most exciting thing about it is that it makes it your kids' responsibility and their decision. When you use this approach, you're not going to have to hear, you did this to me or you did that to me. Because when I tell you, if you choose to stay out past curfew, then you're going to have an earlier curfew, then you can't come home past curfew and say, well, that was your fault, because you preset it, and so they know the decision they were going to make. So I hope this has been really helpful. I would encourage you to learn more about the democratic approach to parenting, and if it's not the approach you're using, really do investigate and figure out ways that you can start to shift your parenting from either permissive, punitive, or mixed to using the democratic style on a regular basis. You'll find that it's more effective for you and more effective for your kids. So thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Vicki Ellis, and I am the Executive Director of Heritage Ranch Christian Children's Home, and it has been my pleasure to do this video series on parenting styles.